So the next thing I want to talk about is the wire itself. If you're just repairing an existing harness or you're already working with some wiring that's in a vehicle, you don't always have choice what it is. You're going to work with it. But if you're buying new wire and you want to go to the parts store and get the right stuff, first off, that's a hard thing to do. The parts stores generally carry um, what I call just PVC insulated wire, and I think that's technically correct. They just call it a primary wire. And this is an example off of a relay harness that I have. It's flexible, it's rubbery, but honestly, it's junk. I mean, the copper inside is okay, but the insulation is terrible. I'll come back to that in a second. What I use when I build a harness or make any repair, or if you bought a wiring kit from one of the big name chassis wiring guys, they're going to use cross-link polyethylene wire. Here's some scraps of it. Kind of to show you the difference. I'll get to that, but it's I think it's the trade name is XLPE wire, and that just denotes the type of insulation. Again, it's copper. I'll show you here. It's same copper as the primary wire from the parts store, but the insulation is what makes it different. So these are both. I would say they're both roughly. I know for a fact this is 20 gauge, and I would say this probably is as well. The cross-link polyethylene, it's just heat resistant, it's fire resistant, it's chemical resistant. I won't bore you with all the details, and honestly, I don't remember them all, but this is what the OEMs use. They use some form of this. You can buy this stuff online. You can get it through Amazon. You can actually get it through AC Delco part numbers, and GM or maybe some of the parts stores that deal with AC Delco can order it for you, but it's not cheap that way. You'll see the terms GXL, SXL, TXL. Those are just denoting different thicknesses of the insulation. TXL is the thinnest. That's what I'm holding in my hand. And I find that it pretty much covers all the bases for anything we would do as a normal, hot rod or off-roader, that sort of thing. The thicker ones, the GXL and SXL, I would consider maybe getting them if you're really in a rough environment. Maybe you've got some off-road lighting or something like that, or winch, things of that nature that are exposed to the elements and really out in nature. Maybe you'd get the thicker stuff, but the TXL tends to cover pretty much everything I would ever do. So let me just show you the main difference in between the PVC wire and the cross-link polyethylene. So I'll make a clean cut here. Say you're under the engine bay or something's getting hot, or if you do have some small fire, immediately this stuff just melts. It turns into goo and it'll catch on fire. It's terrible. Yes, that's pretty hot, but if you've ever worked in a car and seen, a hot manifold or a hot piece of exhaust pipe with a wire up against it, it's going to do that pretty quick if it's primary wire. So your cross-link polyethylene, it will burn, it will melt. Mostly it just discolors. I mean, I can touch it. It's hot, but it isn't on fire yet. I don't even know if I can catch it on fire. I guess eventually there, maybe I can get this to focus. Eventually it does, but I'm holding that on it. Whereas the bigger, even the PVC, the 14 gauge maybe PVC, they're just catches on fire. And I can't put that in a vehicle. Like I said, if you're stuck on the side of the road and all you have is a roll of primary wire and it gets you home, go for it. But I would never use it on purpose, put it that way. So now I thought I would make a couple of crimps using some of the tools I've just talked about. I'll also use my Renstag expensive crimper, I guess you could call it. These are going to be MetroPack 150s. This is used in a lot of GM applications in the LS world and even the LT world. Particularly Gen 3 and Gen 4, you have them in your crank connectors, cam connectors, in a lot of your O2 sensors, things like that. So let's start with the extremely nice crimp, and then I'll see if I can duplicate it real close with the others. So, like I said, with MetroPack 150, I'll put an isolator on it. Again, this is 20 gauge wire, and I'll have to strip it. You don't want to strip it too far back. I like to make it where it's basically the same depth as the crimping area. So I'm actually going to, I have to put this in first to show you, but 0.08, it's a metric sizing of our 20 gauge wire. This is the most difficult part of these tools, is getting to load. See if I can get it in there. and get it on camera.
So you gotta get the crimp started.
Let's try that again. So I'm going to go for the 0.5, which is 20 gauge. If you can see, it's just going to barely start there. It's just barely getting that squeezed. So I have my isolator on here. I have my bare wire trimmed. I'm going to put it in here, and it's going to bottom out. And then the orange wire doesn't move, but the isolator goes up in there. It stops itself, opens up, and look at that. That's about as good as a person can get without having a robot helping them. It's pretty good crimp. Okay, so now I will try the same thing using the Klein catapults and the Iwis crimpers. Not sure exactly what the model is. Let's look at that. That's an IWS-1424B. Let's see what we can do with them. So again, I'll get my isolator. I'm going to slide it on first. You can either put it on first or second after you trim the wire back. So here's where laying that in there gets complicated. You got to make sure you don't go too far back and not catch the crimp areas. You also don't want to go too far forward. You can actually get copper wire up into your terminal area. That's not great either. So it's laid in there about like that. From experience, I'm going to use the number 2 jaw here. And you can see how it kind of lays in there. And I just barely have any copper sticking out past the end of it. I'll use both hands, get it as good as I can. Usually one pass is plenty good. And then I'll get this going a little tighter. Sometimes I do that twice, but it goes around the barrel like that. So this was done with my Iwis. This was done with my Rensteg. Both look pretty good. I don't know about the tensile pull that each one could handle, but either one of those would do great in any vehicle. So the last thing I want to talk about is these Klein cutter crimpers. They are pretty heavy duty. Like I said, they have the kind of the half circle jaw there. And the cutter's pretty stout. I've actually cut small machine screws off the back of panels and dash panels, that sort of thing. They're a strong cutter. They are meant to be used with things like your butt connectors. This is a split eye terminal. These are what you're used to seeing off the parts store rack. They are kind of generic. They're sitting in everyone's back box, their toolbox, their glove box, whatever you're going to say. They'll get you by in a pinch. I don't particularly like them myself, mainly because of the insulation. I don't have a problem with the metal inside, the crump barrel, but this insulation, it's bulky, it melts, it's, I guess, some form of PVC similar to the primary wire. I just don't like them. Again, if it's what you got to do to get you home, go for it. I would never wire an entire vehicle and rely on these. You just can't see how good your crimp is. You can't see what's going on in there. I have pulled the insulation off and used it as a naked connector in the past, but that's, like I said, it's kind of a last resort. Speaking of naked connectors, here's a naked butt connector, a naked male spade connector. This metal is probably a little stouter, maybe it's a better alloy. Not sure what to describe it as, but generally, if you buy these in bulk, you can find a higher quality material. I won't go too deep into that. Just realize that they aren't all made the same. There's some that you can just feel are lighter duty than others. The butt connector here, this particular one, you can see it's got a split in it where it's, I guess, made from the, when the factories turn these up by the millions, they're just rolling them over. You always want to put your, I guess you'd call it that split area. You'll want to put it at the top of the jaw there. I do not want it to be down here where the dimple is going to be made. It doesn't make a good crimp. So you want it up there like that. I hope you can see that. And another thing that's important is you want your terminal to be sized right for your wire. This says on it, very small, 22 to 18 gauge. And I don't know if that'll focus in there or not, but 22 to 18 gauge. I see a lot of people, they'll take a 20 gauge wire and they'll crimp it and double it over and try to stash it in something like that that's meant for maybe, 12 gauge. And it just isn't right. Like I said, you don't want to get in a bad habit of that. So let's see what we can do with this right here. Strip my wire back. I'll strip both of them at the same time. I like to leave a little bit of copper sticking out. For the heck of it, let's do more there. So you can see the dimple stop there. When I put this 20 gauge in, there's a little bit sitting out, and that's okay. So I'll see if I can line this up. I usually put it in the crimper first. So again, I'll put the split seam kind of in the bottom of that and the dimple on top. Okay, good and strong. And we'll do the same thing over here. So there's my seam. Do it the other way, maybe you can see it. Same thing, 20 gauge wire in there, a little bit of copper sticking out, and I'll crimp it. Now, you can see that kept that seam intact. It's not split open. I think I had another one around here that I could show you that was really, here, I intentionally did a bad one. I did not crimp it right. I put the dimple on the seam, and you can see how it's split open. So that one's not right. You don't want to do that. So we got this here. I'm not saying I could hang from that, but it's together pretty good. The next thing I would do is heat shrink it, and that brings up maybe the last tool we'll talk about. So this is a heat gun, Porter cable heat gun. Let's see if I can get it all in the picture there. Most people know what this is. I have seen some people that call it a hair dryer. I guess it's similar, but obviously a little more industrial. This is a PC1500HG. I think they're about $45 nowadays. It's got a thermostat switch on it for the actual heat temperature, and then it's got a high-low fan speed. So same temperature, just different amount of air blowing out. They get obviously pretty hot. I don't know the exact temperature range on it. I usually keep it about right there. If you're not careful, sometimes you can melt a woven fiber, which I won't get into that right now, but it just kind of comes with a feel of what you're shrinking. So what I'm going to do to finish this particular butt splice is I'm going to take a piece of heat shrink, and this is 1/4 inch. It's a dual wall, I can't say that word, with adhesive heat shrink tubing. So the adhesive is the key word here. It's basically got a glue on the inside, and you don't see it, but you can almost kind of feel it sticking together. The heat gun's going to activate that. You can get heat shrink pretty much everywhere, but finding it with the adhesive is not always the easiest. I get this from a local electronics store that they do computers and networking and things like that. They have a lot of cable supplies. Dual wall means that it's thicker than maybe some others. I'm not so much worried about that, but in this instance, what I'm about to do, I do like the adhesive. A full stick of this is about 4 feet long, and I want to say it's probably about $8 for a stick of 1/4 inch. It's not cheap. But what I like to do with it, and I can use these same trimmers, I could also use my medical shears, but regardless, I'll cut a piece off. You see how it kind of stuck together there? That's the glue inside. I happen to get lucky and it'll go over that. See if I can shrink this and get it in the frame. What you can also do with this is set it up on its side, on its back, and it'll stay up right there. But because of my camera angle, I can't get it all in there. Let's just do it this way. This 1/4 inch is maybe a little big for this 20 gauge wire. I'd probably use more of a 3/16 normally, but I want to show you how much that shrink ratio is. It'll go down and cover this up. And that is a pretty thick adhesive joint there. You can actually kind of almost see the glue seeping out of it. Maybe it'll focus on that. Like I said, I could have done a 3/16. I could have done a smaller tube, but that does work. The other reason I wanted to show you that is on a spade connector or a barrel connector, something like that. And you can use it to go over the top, and I'll show you an example. It's better than trying to describe it. So again, nothing too fancy there. I'll put as you can see, this does have a seam as well. So I'll load it up into the crimper with the seam away from the dimple. and crimp it. You can see the shape there. Put a nice dimple in the back. Can't pull it out. And every now and then it'll kind of deform the turn a little bit. That's okay. I don't have too much of a problem with it. If you feel like it, you could gently bend it back. But here's what's cool. When you take this heat shrink, slide it over the end. See how it's kind of stuck together there from the glue. To me, this is a much better looking and a much better performing long-term connection there. Depending on what you're plugging on the other end of this, you know, you're not going to really cut through that unless you really work at it. Much better connection than if you just used that and crimped it and kind of left it hanging there. So anyway, hopefully this has helped some of you maybe decipher what you need and what you don't need. Every project's different. Like I said, for my automotive needs, these are the tools that get me by most days. Again, I would probably buy some combination of these first and foremost. Your diagonal cutters, some catapult strippers. I like the Iowa's crimpers, and maybe these Klein crimper cutters. Not to forget a good pair of medical shears.